I'm really very grateful to be able to join you in the Westmount Public Library, where I actually gave my first ever public talk at the age of 15 back in 1944. And I especially want to thank Jay Iverson and Barbara Burgess. I might mention that I actually went through Westmount High School with Charlie Burgess, who was Barbara Burgess's father. Anyway, I met Paul Almond in 1950 at Balliol College in Oxford in his rooms. We had an appointment to meet at 6, and I arrived on time, and Paul, as happened very often, was late. But I was there with a very distinguished gentleman who sat stiffly upright in a chair, and he turned out to be John Lehman, who was the editor of the London Review, and before that had worked with Virginia Woolf on the Hogarth Press. Now, John Lehman was just one of the many, many distinguished and famous English people that Paul met and charmed when he was at Oxford. This made him an ideal president of the Oxford University Poetry Society, where he appointed me to be the secretary. And for more than a year, we had a series of famous English poets come and read to the students at Oxford after they had drunk wine with us at the Mitre Hotel. Those were blissful years, and I actually have written in my poetry about how Paul would take me on his motorbike and we would drive around to country pubs or go up to Stratford to see Shakespeare plays. It was 2 years later that Paul and I met up again in Montreal. There we used to exchange poems with each other and also with a larger group that included Louis Dudek, Irving Layton, and Leonard Cohen. As a rule, we would meet in my parents' house on Clark Avenue, just above Sherbrooke, not very far from here. And in that period, Paul and I also worked together on a radio play along with his friend Tom Espy, which was actually published on CBC under Tom Espy's name. This may have been Paul's first connection to the CBC. It was, I think, in 1954 that Paul invited me to come out with W.H. Auden to his aunt's cottage at Applebarrow, just on the side of Mount St. Hilaire. We had a wonderful day with Auden, which was helped by the fermented cider that came bootleg from a farmhouse down the road. And it was there that Auden offered to rent Paul and me his house in Ischia in Italy for $10 a month with the maid thrown in for free. This was an offer Paul and I thought about very seriously. Could have changed our lives, but in the end we decided not to do it. But these were not such happy years. I think Paul wrote 50 stories in that year, of which I believe only one was ever published. And for my part, I was having so much trouble with my political science PhD on T.S. Eliot that in the end I packed my clothes in a knapsack and hitchhiked down to Cambridge, Mass. To start over. So after that, Paul and I saw much less of each other, though he did become godfather to my daughter Cassie. As you know, or may know, Paul was quite a prankster, and this had a huge impact on my very brief career for 4 years as a Canadian diplomat. I received a message to go to what I'll call the Security Division of External Affairs, and very solemnly they showed me an envelope addressed to me from Paul Almond, which also said in the upper left-hand corner, Communist Cell Number 6, Toronto, Ontario. This had a stamp on the envelope, but it had not been postmarked. It had arrived inside another envelope marked On His Majesty's Service. They told me in very uncertain terms that I must get this fellow Paul Almond to stop this kind of hijinks immediately. But this had no effect on Paul, who sent a second similar envelope. The second interview in the Security Division at External Affairs was so solemn, so serious, so self-important that I think it may have been the moment where I first conceived the decision that I would perhaps leave External Affairs, which is what I did 3 years later. Now, I've never regretted that decision, so thank you, Paul. Our careers went different ways after that, but we both ended up in California. And Paul and I had something of an annual pilgrimage every year to go up to the delta of the Sacramento River, where we would see sandhill cranes and tundra swans that had come all the way down from Siberia. And Paul was a bit of a migrant pilgrim himself. Every summer he went back to his grandparents' house in Chigawak on the Gaspé Peninsula, Quebec. And for years he pleaded with me that I should go there and visit him. And in 2013, I actually did. And I'm so glad that I did, because I saw a completely different aspect of Paul there. Although he was now the famous movie director and he had written all 8 of his Alford Saga novels, here he was excited about something completely different. He was going to compete in the village fair with his prize-winning beans and corn and squash and lettuce and peas. I had known Paul for 6 decades, but now I was seeing him in a completely different and more intimate way, even though I have to say, he called himself the Chigawak Kid, but he wasn't. He was actually born in Montreal. I owe an enormous debt to Paul. His energy and enthusiasm were something that infected me every time I saw him, so that I would see the world with fresh excitement. This was even true last November, when I saw him and Joan for the last time at their lovely house in Malibu. Neither of them were in good health, and they now had Joan's family to cook meals and take care of details. But Paul was still full of enthusiasm, full of energy, still able to communicate to my wife Rona and me the sense of the magic of life. When I heard that Paul had died, I was so heartbroken that for 4 days I could do almost nothing. Finally, I wrote a very brief note to Joan and said to her that when Paul died, something in me died also. And this was something I've never said about anyone else. Once again, my great thanks to Jay Iverson and Barbara Burgess for letting me be part of this event. God bless you all.